Hey everyone, Thyworm here. Yesterday I decided to take a little break from primarily progressing my character and investigating what the new secrets of the Atlas, including crafting on gear with memory strands, could mean for us SSF players. In this video I will share my findings so far, check the timestamps, and don't forget to subscribe for more SSF content. Let's dive in. Let's start with a disclaimer. This video is based on very little data, and the angle I am taking here is an SSF approach, meaning I'm looking at what is feasible to do for your average SSF player. More elaborate guides will be posted by creators with large communities, however those tend to focus on trade and use currencies not readily available in SSF. The crafting proposed in those videos may not be feasible as a result. I will try to focus on more simple but viable crafts and show you sort of how everything works, and then you can take that knowledge and use it to your own advantage. To unlock the secrets of the Atlas, you will find Egan in a regular tier 14 map, opening a tear in the fabric of the Atlas. He then meets you in your hideout and opens a memory thread, a series of maps very reminiscent of how the memories of masters like Nico worked previously. Your job is to complete these maps using your map device. The individual maps can be crafted on with alchemy orbs and whatnot and chisels. You can pick a map device crafting option, and you can also add scarabs to it. You can juice it as much as you want, just beware of the modifiers. These maps are a little bit more difficult than your typical tier 16, but they're easier than tier 17, which is exactly what GGG intended. Once you open the map, kill the monsters, and then kill the final map boss, you discover an altar with two options, similar to how Ether or Exarch altars work. You can pick an option, and then this option applies to the remaining maps in the memory thread, buffing all remaining maps. You will have to repeat this step a few times until you reach the last map in the memory thread, which will then be a super juiced map, right? Because of all these altars. And not only that, this map has a special name. It is not based on a regular map, but it has a new layout. It is called, for example, the Theater of Lies. It has a bunch of monsters, like any normal map, and a new map boss at the end. In this case, you see me fighting the deceitful god in the Theater of Lies. Once you kill him, Egan, back in your hideout, opens a portal to a specific memory, which contains a new pinnacle boss, an incarnation, and in this case I am fighting the tutorial version of the Incarnation of Fear. 3 new pinnacle bosses were added in total. Once you're done with the tutorial, everything I just explained works in the exact same way in endgame, with the only difference that the last boss of a memory thread, so the deceitful god in my example, drops the memory itself, an itemized version of what Egan provides in the tutorial, and you can slot it in a map device and fight the pinnacle boss. You cannot craft on this memory, by the way, I tried. You must repeat the tutorial in tier 15 and tier 16 maps as well, and then you have completed the entire thing. There's one big difference, however, with using this system in the actual endgame after completing the tutorial. In the tutorial, Egan spawns in regular tier 14, 15 and 16 maps. In endgame, at least when I played yesterday, and I played for the whole day, that doesn't seem to happen often, and I think it didn't happen at all. Egan and memory tears only show up in maps that are influenced by the originator's memories, it seems, which would make sense, right? Only in these maps Egan shows up, but it's not guaranteed, and only then he will initiate another memory thread. To end this section, here is the TLDR. Complete the tutorial for tier 14, 15 and 16. Open a map that is influenced by the originator. It has a blue glow on the map item and difficult mods if you craft on it. Find Egan in the map, who spawns maybe half of the time. Talk to Egan in your hideout, where you will open a memory thread. Complete all the maps in the thread by talking to Egan. Fight the boss in the last map of the thread, who drops a memory. Slot the memory in your map device. Fight one of the new pinnacle bosses, and rinse and repeat. One pro tip here, make sure you run the memory thread as soon as you have it, because Egan can only open one at a time, it seems. Leaving him waiting is a waste of time and potential, as the memory threads are much more rewarding thanks to all the altars compared to running just single maps. Finally, inside of these maps you have several petals, which is the mechanic that you can use while you are playing these maps, but I'm not gonna go into that. I think they're quite annoying to use currently, and I'm not a big fan, and I can see GGG is changing how these will be activated at least, and maybe they will overhaul the whole mechanic. Now that you have a base understanding of the gameplay loop and how to unlock everything, it's time to talk about items, memory strands, and crafting in Solar Cell Found. In any map that has the originator's memories, whether it's one that is part of a memory thread created by Egan or just a standalone map, you can find items that contain memory strands. It's got rose petals in the backdrop and it tells you how many memory strands it has. The higher the number, the better. If you hover over the item and hold Alt, the item states, when adding random explicit modifiers to this item, higher level modifiers will be more common, proportional to the number of memory strands. Memory strands are consumed whenever random explicit modifiers are added to this item. Let's break this down into a few components. First, the higher the number of memory strands, the more crafting you can do before it runs out, and at that point the item is indistinguishable from any other item. Second, these strands are only consumed when you apply random explicit modifiers. If I take this lesser Eldritch Ember, which would add a random implicit modifier, you see no impact on the number, so it only works for explicit modifiers. Third, it states the modifiers affected must be random, not determined. A good way to showcase this is by using an essence, as essences have both a determined modifier and also random modifiers. Applying this Mothering Essence of Torment on this Savant's robe applies the deterministic modifier of chance to avoid lightning damage and consumes all of the memory strands to improve the other random explicit modifiers. The outcome is bad, but I think you get the idea. The last part is about the number of memory strands consumed. As you could see in the previous example, this low tier essence had the potential to consume up to 80 memory strands, but the item only had 41. That is partially why the outcome I think is not that great. I think this is an indication that essence crafting might require high numbers to be good. And not only high numbers, it should also consume a bunch of those. In short, what you're looking for are good base items with high memory strand numbers, and your NeverSync loot filter has several options to filter on both the tiers of items and the minimum numbers, so use that to your advantage or you will end up with a quad tab like I have. Then I was thinking to provide some insightful SSF crafting examples, and to be fair I failed a little bit, but at least you will get some insights. I sorted the quad tab of memory gear and wanted to provide a breakdown of some initial findings. I'm sure others in the future will be much more elaborate, but this at least will be usable in SSF. Let's start with white or normal items. You have in theory all regular crafting options available to you, and as long as at least one explicit modifier is random, it will consume memory strands. You will know by selecting the crafting material and hovering over the item. It will tell you how much memory strands will be consumed, and this also then means that it works. For now, however, let's do some SSF-friendly simple experiments. We're starting with an orb of transmutation, augmentation and alteration. The first consumes 0 to 8 memory, apparently no matter which base type I put it on. Let's use it on this chest, and the result of course isn't great. You can then spam some alterations until you run out of memory. You get some decent results, maybe a little better than average, but this seems not very useful at all, as you will only have a few attempts before you run out. I can see this having some use perhaps for the Recombinator, but other than that in SSF I don't really see why you would do this. But if you do, let me know in the comments below. I think much more promising, and this is what I've been primarily doing, is use orbs of binding or orbs of alchemy. I ran out of bindings, but I got a bunch of alchemy orbs, which consume 0 to 50 memory strands. Let's first slap it on a few low memory items. It is not great, but you do get a bunch of high tier affixes, however you also still get a bunch of lower tier affixes. Still though, an item like this Fencer Helm turns out to be quite nice, with an open prefix so I can even use a benchcraft still. And you know, as this is such a cheap currency to use in SSF, I think it's worth just to use them and see if you get lucky, which on average you will be a lot more often compared to using this on regular gear. I would however recommend you only do this on items that have 50 plus memory to get the most out of it in case it does consume a bunch of those memory strands. So talking about that, what if we consume the full potential of the alchemy orb? It's low sample sizes, sure, but let's try a few. Well, as it turns out, it doesn't by default consume a lot of strands. That is RNG by the looks of it. Should it consume more, you get a much better item, so you should still try to get high memory strand gear like I just said, but there's also a chance it consumes just a few stacks, and I think that's not what you want, typically speaking. Still, this wand has very high tier affixes as a result. They just don't really match. By my very limited testing and also by reading the description, it seems you don't get affixes with less weight more often. The rare affixes, like +1 level to skills for example, you don't get those more often because of the memory strands. It's just that whatever affix you do get, it tends to be of a higher tier. You will get the most common affixes still a lot, but those will be with high tiers. So depending on what you're looking for, that is either a good or a bad thing. Now let's get back to the essences. Note that it consumes 0 to 80 no matter which tier of essence you use, which is interesting. I think what you're hoping for is that it consumes a ton of strands, rolling a bunch of high tier modifiers. This way you'll have one guaranteed mod and then the rest of them are also high tier mods. You can use most essences on both normal and rare items, but I will be targeting normal items for now with very high memory strands. Any magic quality piece with high memory strands, I would likely just scour and then apply either an essence or an alchemy orb. The same logic applies as with the previous alchemy orbs, but you can see the potential here with essences because the moment it consumes a lot of memory strands or even all of them, almost the entire item rolls with tier 1 modifiers. Super common tier 1 modifiers, which is the issue that we will need to remedy, but tier 1 modifiers nonetheless. Before we talk about these remedies, you can also simply use Chaos Orbs on rare items with high numbers, as it also consumes up to 50. This is essentially the same thing as scouring and then using an alchemy orb. I don't think this is a great way to use Chaos Orbs, but you know, it's a little faster and if you got spare, then why not? You can remedy the RNG in part, if you are looking to remedy it, right, by using fractured items as a starting point, but I haven't found a single one that also has memory strands. It seems incredibly unlikely in Solar Self-Found to find one of those which has a high number of memory strands and is also on a good base item. I'm not even sure these items can drop fractured, but you would think so. I think a more viable strategy is using meta crafting, which would only require a good base and a high number of memory strands, which I do think is possible in SSF. In fact, I got a few of those in this stash tab. For example, let's imagine I use this bow on which I'm going to spend my hard-earned currency in SSF as a summoner. I could annul away a suffix, lock prefixes using the benchcraft, and then assume that harvest crafting adds random explicit modifiers and consumes strands. I would argue it does in fact add random explicit modifiers, but the game somehow doesn't, which I could have known if I looked at the tooltip, like I told you guys earlier. Whether it should or not is a different thing, maybe it's bugged, but at the moment of writing, harvest doesn't work, it doesn't consume memory strands. Maybe it's not considered random, but I really don't see the difference between a harvest mod and an essence. On top of that, it bricked the item, so you know, this craft is done. But hopefully you can see the potential here. Other interesting currency that you will have in Solar Self-Found are, for example, Field Chaos Orbs. Those are consuming strands. You can use an Eldritch Chaos Orb, those work as well. By locking a specific part of the item and then adding random explicit modifiers, it will consume strands with potentially great results. So I think even for SSF players, there are plenty of opportunities to create great items without too much crafting knowledge involved. And I tried to, highlight a few, although I can't give like in-game examples because it's day 4 of the league. Please note that Vaal Orbs don't consume strands, and corrupted items can drop with memory strands, which is mostly pointless, but I assume a Tainted Chaos Orb would in fact work. Good luck finding those, however, and if you do, please don't spend them on these items. I think it's a total waste. Talking about waste, I don't really want to waste more currency for now. I still have a character to progress, but I hope that you've learned a thing or two and are thinking how to best leverage this for your own build. The TLDR, use bindings and alchemy orbs a lot on gear with high memory strand numbers, because you may just get lucky for either yourself, your animate guardian or your merc. For more elaborate viable crafts in SSF, use meta crafting, such as prefixes cannot be changed, and then use a Field Chaos Orb and have some good chance of additional high tier affixes thanks to the memory strands. You can then finish these items with a benchcraft, or finally, which I think also is SSF viable, simply use raw essences that you have plenty of, as it guarantees one mod, rolls high level other mods, and potentially leaves you with an open affix to craft. And then using those open affixes, again, you could lock prefixes or suffixes, use a field chaos or band, rinse and repeat. I think you get the idea. Last but not least, I want to talk about a few Atlas nodes. At the very top of the Atlas passive tree, you will find nodes that either increase the chances of spawning tiers in maps, which opens up more memory threads and gives you more items, or with Grasp the Past, you have a better chance at high numbers of memory strands, which after our little crafting session, I'm sure you can see the potential of. And there are a few nodes that increase the chance of memory influenced maps, those are great as well. In general, I think you can use either a Maven rushing tree that also takes these nodes as you are already quite close, or you use Eldritch altars, I think those are viable as well. I am personally using Maven as she witnesses all those bosses in the memory thread as well, which seems to work out nicely. I may get some woke gems as well, but that is something for a new video. I really hope I was able to shed some SSF light on the new secrets of the Atlas and the crafts. I'm looking forward to what other creators much smarter than me will discover. Any tips that you may already have, please put them in the comments and I will pin the most useful one. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Love you all. See you soon. Bye bye.